Declaro abierto.
The 9th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Togolese Republic to introduce the speech of the head of state.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce His Excellency Mr. Faure Essozim Gnassingbé, President of the Togolese Republic, to make his statement in this august assembly. I thank you.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée générale,
President of the General Assembly, heads of states and governments, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, I would like to convey to you my warm congratulations and the best wishes for the 76th regular session of the United Nations General Assembly. I would like to also pay a very warm tribute to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, who managed, together with his team, to revamp the administration of the United Nations to make sure that it is adapted to the COVID-19 pandemic, and thus making sure that our organization is not functionally paralyzed. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the topic which brings us together this year is in fact a call to action. And it urgently demands that we act immediately in the area of health care to make sure that we stop the pandemic, which has lasted far too long. And it calls upon us to tackle upfront the various social and economic dimensions of the pandemic crisis. Mr. President, as the previous year, the year 2021, is also marked by the devastation wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic. Several months ago, where we hoped that progressively the pandemic will be eradicated thanks to scientific breakthroughs which enabled the world to have the vaccine, several worrying developments and the Delta variant compelled us to yet once again realize that we have to remain vigilant. In fact, that pandemic has led to a serious uptick in poverty and increased the social inequalities, as well as a gap between the developed countries and those which are developing. According to the World Bank, the pandemic triggered the first recession in sub-Saharan Africa in the last 25 years, and the situation is particularly worrying in the countries with fragile economies, and in particular in the least developed countries. To overcome the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is urgent for us to seriously consider the issues of the indebtedness of developing countries. We welcome the decision made by the G20 when they approved last year the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, DSSI. I would like at the same time to urge the international community to consider favorably the conclusions that came out of the Paris Summit on the funding of African economies to allow our countries to overcome the results of the pandemic and to make sure that we have a lasting recovery after the pandemic. Furthermore, my country supports the Act Accelerator provisions, which is co-directed by the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the World Health Organization, and is in partnership with UNICEF and the World Bank. The COVAX dimension of this coalition enables us today to accelerate the development and the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines. This initiative contributed towards facilitating the access to the vaccine amongst the most disadvantaged. Nonetheless, the vaccine divide remains very pronounced, and the results still are below our expectations for this program. Indeed, whilst the northern countries have more than 50%, approximately 50% of their population already vaccinated, in Africa, only about 1% of people have received the vaccine. Our effort to eradicate the pandemic will only be successful if there is an equal distribution of available vaccines to make sure that the African countries can undergo massive vaccinations. And we, to this end, encourage the efforts aimed at providing an equitable access to vaccines to make sure that we have a effective collective global immunity. Mr. President, similarly to the disparity we have when it comes to the vaccines, the global recovery also runs the danger of separating the world into two blocks. On the one hand, most of the advanced economy with access to vaccines and who can hope to quickly return to normal. On the other hand, we will have countries which do not have or have very little access and therefore are faced with the real possibility of the resurging infections and a great number of deaths. This bipolar picture of the world, given the global threat we're witnessing, is not what we want to see. It is therefore our responsibility to make sure that the global recovery benefits one and all. Now, given the current challenges in front of the world, multilateralism cannot be just a diplomatic mechanism or a diplomatic mechanism amongst others. It has to be used in order to create a world order, a very special way of organizing international relations, which is based on cooperation, the rule of law, collective action, and the principle of global common prosperity. Mr. President, the urgency of our current situation is not just health-related, it is also climate-related. And the climate currently shows us very worrying signs. Climate change is the greatest challenge for humanity over the past decades. The threat of the global warming for societies and ecosystems is only growing, and disastrous effects of climate change on all of the continents are glaring, and we see it in particular. We're witnessing melting glaciers, hurricanes, the rising sea levels, and droughts, which result in fires in entire regions, thus making our people ever more vulnerable. Even more worrying is that the annual report on the gap between the needs and the prospects when it comes to reducing greenhouse effects shows that even if all of the unconditional current commitments undertaken under the Paris Agreements are implemented, the temperature will still rise by 3.2 degrees centigrade. And this would lead to even wider and more destructive climate consequences. The collective efforts now need to be multiplied fivefold to make sure that we reach the goal of reducing the emissions by 1.5 degrees, as is stipulated in the IPCC special report on climate change. We have to act and do it now, and that's why my country encourages governments, companies, cities, and all of the financial institutions to accede to the global coalition so as to result in carbon neutrality. We also welcome the prospect of the COP26 in Glasgow in Scotland, where the countries representing more than 65% of carbon emissions undertook far-reaching commitments and will call upon others to join in with them. Mr. President, in my country, Togo, even though the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on public investment in the social sectors and basic services does slow down our efforts to promote human development in line with Sustainable Development Goals, nonetheless, human safety and the well-being of our people remains at the heart of the general policy of my government. This is what needs our daily initiatives in various sectors where we assign priorities to the most vulnerable groups, women, children, and the youth. The roadmap adopted by the government immediately after the epidemic hit, in link with the National Development Plan, shows our common vision, which consists of making Togo a country of social cohesion and peace, a modern nation with inclusive and lasting economic growth. If we want to reach our goals, we need to implement specific actions which would ensure, inter alia, access to drinking water, access to education, quality healthcare, access to energy, rural entrepreneurship and agribusiness, productivity and wealth creation, employment and the empowerment of women and the youth, and social protection. Specifically now, as we try to build on the progress we already achieved in economic growth and poverty reduction, we will spare no effort to ensure that our people live under conditions of genuine social harmony, which is a necessary prerequisite for inclusive development. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, on the 26th July last, the General Assembly decided to convene a high-level meeting on universal health coverage under the auspices of his President for 2023. In the same vein, and to make sure that we guarantee the access of everyone to high-level healthcare through a mechanism of pooling risks, the government of my country passed a law instituting universal healthcare coverage so as to make sure that all of our people can lead a healthy life and enjoy their well-being throughout their life. The same applies to the national program of medical and financial assistance to pregnant women and the newly born, which we called WEZU. It was officially launched on the 26th August 2021 and is to contribute towards significantly reducing maternal and neonatal mortality. This coverage will help improve the health indicators for the mothers and children, because prenatal care and maternal care for all pregnant women will be free of charge. Moving on to education now. I would like to underscore that we've introduced free tuition for preschoolers and primary school children. We've extended school lunches to all of the primary public schools. After that, we put together a system of social and medical coverage, and we decided that in year 2021-2022, we will relieve of all schooling and tuition fees all of the mid-school and high school children in my country. This last measure, which alleviates the burden on the parents, and therefore they can thus prepare for the beginning of the school alone, it adds to the list of many decisions taken by the government that we decided to take in order to lower the negative impact of the pandemic on our people. When it comes now to equity and gender equality and promoting the rights of women and girls, I would like to say that my country in the recent years has made significant progress. Thus, women are represented in decision-making bodies at the level of 35% in 2021, which is progress compared to 23% in 2019. We, guided by this, joined in with the global solidarity movement to ensure there's greater gender equality and equality, the He for She movement, which was launched by UN Women, and the national campaign of He for She was launched in Lomé on the 23rd of July 2021. When it comes to the economy now, we maintain our commitment to improve the climate, which is conducive to companies and their competitiveness, which is necessary to attract investment. Our efforts made so far were not in vain, and we can see this in the fact that the Togo has been ranked in the 2021 UNCTAD report as one of the favorite countries for foreign direct investment in 2022. The progress is 85% compared to the 2019 report. So the results we have seen to date have only reaffirmed us in our goal to make sure that Togo becomes an industrial hub with a strong emphasis on public-private partnership. And this has translated into the introducing of an Adetikope industrial platform, which is one of the major milestones of our development. This is an industrial park, and it is there to provide employment to those people who have previously only been exporting raw commodities. In other words, we're trying to create a high value-added chain thanks to promoting the local industries in such sectors as the agro industry, more specifically cotton, soya, sesame, coffee, cocoa and poultry. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, for 75 years, our organization has been working tirelessly to promote international peace and security, inter alia through early warning, conflict prevention, electoral assistance, observers of elections, as well as through peacekeeping and peace building. But the threat is becoming greater and more diversified. Everywhere in the world, intolerance and religious extremism result in numerous victims. And Africa pays a very high price here. A global reaction is therefore urgent here to support the efforts made by the African countries and regional organizations as we're trying to combat the scourge which threatens to take lasting roots on the continent. And in order to do that, the difficulties of funding the G5 Sahel or even MINUSMA have to be overcome expeditiously. It is, in fact, incomprehensible that to date, about 50% of the contributions pledged have not yet been dispersed, and that MINUSMA is also having to deal with budgetary constraints in order to ensure that they can extend logistical support to the G5 Sahel. President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, global prosperity rests on peace and stability in those regions which have been affected by conflict. Togo, therefore, would like to reiterate the common appeal of G7 plus members, the appeal for a global ceasefire everywhere on the planet. I remain convinced that thanks to us pulling our efforts, this current session of the General Assembly will contribute significantly towards strengthening the resolve of our states to ensure that our planet becomes a safer world which is fully committed to the well-being of our peoples. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I thank the President of the Togolese Republic for the statement just delivered. The General Assembly will now hear an address by Luis Rodolfo Corona, President of the Dominican Republic. I ask protocol